Media Forum is on India-China, a roadmap for media cooperation. The moderator for this panel is Mr. Abhishek Kapoor, Executive Editor of Republic TV. With over 15 years of experience in journalism covering government and society, Mr. Kapoor presently covers the Indian Prime Minister's office and the Parliament. Pleasure to have you here with us today, sir. The other esteemed panelists are Mr. Xu Qingwei, the Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Newsroom, English Service, China Radio International. He's a political analyst and current affairs commentator on Chinese foreign policy, in particular those related to Asia, the United States, and Australia. Ms. Supriya Sahu is the Director General of Doordarshan, one of the largest public broadcasting organizations in the world. Ms. Sahu is a senior Indian Administrative Service Officer and has extensively worked in the media and broadcasting sector for over 7 years. She's also the Vice President of Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union. Ms. Su Yuting is the Chief Political and Foreign Affairs Reporter from China Global Television. She has covered several visits and engagements of Chinese leaders. Ms. Smita Prakash with us today is the Group Editor of Asian News International, which is India's largest multimedia platform. Ms. Prakash has reported for various Indian and foreign broadcasters, including NPR of the US, Channel News Asia, Singapore. She's the first and only woman editor to head a news agency in India. Over to you, Mr. Kapoor.
All right, thank you. Since this is the last panel, let me hit the ground running. Sometime in the early 1980s, when China was still not the rising power, there was a David Bowie number, China Girl, which had a bit of racist connotations. This was the time when China was making its transition from Mao to Deng and to socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, 40 years later, no one would perhaps dare do that. The world has reconfigured. We have a China that has moved from socialism with Chinese characteristics to capitalism with Chinese characteristics. And we have seen how China has risen to become a top economy and a powerful nation as it marks 40 years of its reforms. As the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. Hence, as a student of foreign policy, I would recall two quotes from the Americas of 1960s, or thereabout, about the United States of that time. This was the time when the United States had emerged as the global cop, riding on the momentum given by the goodwill of Marshall Plan. Mexican leader, 7 times President Porfirio Diaz, had remarked in exasperation, so far from God and yet so near to United States of America. I also draw a quote from British philosopher and thinker Arnold Toynbee. He had said once, America is like a big friendly dog in a small room. Even if it wags its tails in love, it knocks down a chair or two. So both in the case of Mexico and Britain, these were friendly nations trying to come to terms with the power of United States. The crux was that given the propensity of power projection, America could hurt even while being friendly. While we are seeing a reasonably good measure of restraint, China does feel like flexing its muscles and shows full awareness of being a civilizational power. Challenge would be to balance power projection with restraint that keeps neighbors comfortable. That's where soft power comes in handy. And what better way than to let the society be seen and heard, and not just through the government. And if that's agreed upon, then media, both social and mainstream, becomes a powerful tool for social exchange or societal exchange. Faiyan and Huensang were, after all, scribes essentially, chronicling India for the Chinese of ancient and medieval times. Having lived through our own version of socialism, which has not completely vanished, I'm talking about India, it should be good if we get to see more of how China has reached these heights of capitalism, where the recent Singles Day sale clocked US $30 billion in 24 hours, which was more than the Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales of the United States combined together. President Xi wants to tell the world a better story of China. I quote him a bit. I recently read this in some media reports. The relationship between China and the rest of the world is undergoing historic changes. China needs to know better about the world, and the world needs to know better about China. I believe he was saying this after inaugurating the CGTN and its 6 language bureaus. Now, I was recently watching Xinhua News TV, and the manner in which the Chinese reporter, the lady reporter, covered the Yellow Vest protests, for example, would you allow foreign media or Indian media specifically to cover events in China? My own experience of which I will delve into a little detail when we discuss things, is that it's difficult to go out and report easily in China. For example, can media cover aspects of Chinese society without being escorted? Of course, within the framework of reciprocity. As has been flagged by yesterday's Tibet Act in America, access does seem to be an issue. From the Indian side, I would say, when situations like Doklam happen, can we be more restrained? I say this with some authority because when Doklam happened last year, there were some channels comparing how many frigates each nation has, how many missiles each nation has, how many aircrafts each nation has. I say this with some responsibility because in my channel, I was part of the decision making. We decided not to do that. I'll come to close of my opening remarks. As we discuss a roadmap over the next half hour, let me recall what Deng Xiaoping would have said. Cross a river by feeling the stones. Let's do it together. I'll now let Sue take the platform and give her remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashbeck, and thank you very much for quoting the motto from CGTN. Yes, we make a difference, and our mission is to let the world know more about China and let China to go abroad. Thank you very much. And I want to say namaste. It's really such a pleasure and also honor for me to be here with all of you today in New Delhi, and thank you very much for having me. I'm very delighted to be in this great nation again, because you know that my previous visit to India was about 2 years ago in October 2016. I was in Goa covering the President Xi Jinping's visit to India and also the 8th BRICS Summit. And I also went to Mumbai, and those are the economic hub of India. And this time I came to Bangalore and now in New Delhi. So these cities are full of vitality and just to give me a very, very good and deep impression and left me with very fond memories. And you know that I personally have very intimate relations with India because that President Xi Jinping had only received a foreign leader twice during over the past 5 years tenure, and those two are for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And you know that one, the first time was in Xi'an in 2015, and the second one was in Wuhan in 2018. And it's kind of destiny that for both those two occasions and more others, I was there witnessing the very historical moments between the two leaders and also reporting the very important talks and doing live broadcasting at the venue. So I myself feeling that being a political and foreign affairs reporter is not an easy task. But I believe that I'm just fond of doing this job because I can devote my own contributions to letting the world know what's happening between China and many other countries, and especially more important, between China and India. We are the largest in the world, that the two largest developing countries in the world and also the two major emerging economies. So if we united together, we can prosper together and also make a difference to the whole world, because our media just shoulder a great responsibility to make a difference. I believe that a very small step of both medias from our two countries could make a huge difference, because we are shouldering the responsibility to present a real China China to India and also a real India to China. And you know that China-India relations over the past 1 year just make huge strides. President Xi Jinping has already met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi 4 times, from the informal talks in Wuhan in April to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in June, from the, we know that's the very significant BRICS Summit in South Africa's Johannesburg in June, and also to the G20 summits in the Argentina capital in November. So those kind of events just to show us the two sides have already sent out a very clear signal that there have been perceptible improvements in our two relations, and both sides are optimistic that 2019 will be an even better year for the bilateral relations between our two countries. And you know that personally, I want to share with you a story of a very touching story, because you know that when we are just facing the .com standoff, that's the 27-day standoff in the border area of .com, and the Indian defense minister just to go to the frontier to meet with the Chinese soldier. And you know that the Indian defense minister just asked, what do you know about Namaste means? And one of the Chinese troops just replied, that means nice to meet you. And the Indian defense minister just replied, yes, we say Namaste. So what do you say in Chinese? And the Chinese soldier replied, we say ni hao. So the defense minister replied, yes, we say Namaste. So that's a very positive signal, shows that not only the ordinary people between the two sides or the high-level diplomats or the ministers between the two sides could make a very good contribution to the development of bilateral ties. You know that if our media just make a very small step and make a difference to the world, and you know that that's just a very good example, because I read this story from the Chinese media, so you could see that how great difference the Chinese media have been made to boost the development between our two countries. And you know that although the developments of our bilateral ties have made great achievements over the past 1 year, but we also see some of the irritant discourse from the Western media. You know that some even accused China of posing challenges to India by displacing its muscular foreign and defense policy along its border regions, and whether it's the Indo-Pacific or Indian Ocean region or along the line of actual control. And some others even claimed that China, you know, the very important infrastructure projects on the Belt and Road Initiative is just aimed to extending China's global influence and also posing some of the security implications to India, because you know that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, that's a very important flagship under the BRI, is seen by some of the Indian people as implications to its security, because it's posing a threat to the its border regions, because it's just a threat India's country's sovereignty. So if we imagine if the opinion makers from both our two countries do nothing to this discourse from the Western media, how worse the situation will be. You know that the population of our two countries just accounts 1/3 of the world's total. If the people only perceive China or India through reading and watching the Western media's reports, how worse it will be. So we should just build a direct channel between our two sides, to watch the TV, to read the newspapers directly between our two sides, between our two medias, from the Indian media and also the Chinese media as well. So that's the very significant points that I would like to point out today. I would like to use the word Namaste to represent my idea, because you know that I just personally feeling that Namaste is a very perfect and also polite word that can be used every day. We see Ni Hao, that's very polite, and the word Namaste even used in the logo of the Goa BRICS Summit. You know, it's Namaste in the middle and with the petals of the India's national flower of lotus. So I would like to pick up the words one by one from the words Namaste. So the first is N. N means neighbors. Always remember that India's diplomatic policy, that is the neighborhood policy, is quite similar with Chinese President Xi Jinping has proposed the neighborhood diplomacy as its highest priority. So always remember that we are neighbors. We should be friendly to each other. We should lending each other with a helping hand rather than embroiling in quarrels. And the second one is A, namaste, A. The second A represents amity. Amity between the two peoples, just to, is the key foundation to state-to-state relations. In Chinese, we say, 国之交在于民相亲. So amity between the two peoples is just the whole key to state-to-state relations. And I want to share with you a very, vivid example, because when I was in Goa in the year of 2016, I've been to Mumbai and doing a story about the local people. The Indian boy just initiated school, just teaching the Indian people the Chinese language. And just a few days ago, when I arrived in India, he just told me that he has found a job in the Chinese industrial and commercial bank in Mumbai. And he said himself has already benefited greatly from China's policy of opening up and reform, because you know that this year marks Chinese, the 40th anniversary of Chinese policy of opening up and reform. And also, you know that during the G20 summit, President Xi Jinping has already met with Narendra Modi, and President Xi Jinping said he referred to the possibility of increased imports of the products from India, including rice and sugar. And also, President Xi Jinping has highlighted the possibility of pharmaceutical areas could also be a very important area in the trade relations between our two countries. And I want to say that in March this year, the Chinese Commerce Ministry, Zhongshan, has already led a business delegation that is purchasing the goods worth of $2.4 billion in India. So those are the very vivid examples that China does not intend to seek trade imbalance with India, and China is opening its arms to welcome the investments from foreign countries, including India. And you know that's a very vivid example of how the ordinary people can get benefit from the bilateral relations between our two countries. And third, namaste, that is M. M means mutual understanding. You know that? Yes. Back to the year of 2015, I was also in Xi'an doing the reports between President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And to my mind, what impressed me most is that President Xi Jinping has invited Narendra Modi to visit the wild Goose Pagoda. I think most of you must know that if you've been to the ancient city of Xi'an to dig out the civilization and knowledge about the ancient Chinese history. So the White Goose Pagoda that was established in the year of 642 AD in the recognition of China's monk of Shenzhen. He has done a 17-year-long journey, travel to India and go back to China to popularize Buddhism. So that is quite a vivid example. And we know that lots of Indian monks have also go to China to spread Buddhism as well. So that's the significant thing that both our media should also learn from each other in this area, to learn how to write good stories and to do good reports to boost the closer bond between our two peoples. And also, the fourth is A, that is Amsir. I would like to say Amsir because that's a new word told by my Indian friends, and he tells me that Amsir is a Sanskrit language. In Chinese, it's Fanwen. Amsir means no violence and no injury. And we remember Gandhi has already proposed the principle of non-violence. So both our two nations' medias could do the reports that causing no harm to each other. We should boost the relationship to each other without any violence. And I think this is the fifth one, right? It's namaste, and that is the S. S represents sincerity. We know that neighborhood policy, that diplomacy was guided by the principles of amity and also sincerity and mutual benefits and inclusiveness. In Chinese, we mean 亲诚惠容. That is the diplomacy of Chinese neighborhood. So sincerity is also very important. You know, that we should show sincerity to each other. And I remember that Gandhi has always proposed that China and India are the travelers sharing wheels and woes in a common journey. So we should remember that we should be sincere to each other as well as the media person. And also, T represents trust. Mutual trust is also very important. And the last one, you know, trust and namaste, right? The last one should be?
Yes.
Yes, E. E is echo. If you're smiling to each other, the other one will smile to you as well. You might say, Abhishek, yes, you're a very handsome person. What would you like to say to
I would
me?
say thank you.
Yeah. It might say, oh, you're so ugly. I hate you. What would you say to me?
Well, we meet again.
So that's kind of echo. So we think that the both media should also be friendly to each other. We should promote the bilateral relations by writing good stories rather than focusing on the differences between our two countries. Frankly speaking, you know that because our two countries have different histories, different society, social backgrounds, and also different cultures, it's inevitable for our two countries to have problems. And but we should just use our own efforts to not let the conflicts impede confrontations. So that's quite significant. You know that I've been traveled to lots of countries, including the Brazil and Fortaleza, and I remember that Narendra Modi have told President Xi Jinping that China and India are two bodies within one spirit. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has also replied to Modi that China and India should speak in one voice.
Right.
Then the whole world will listen. So you know that we should speak in one voice by our own two media as well. And I want to conclude. I know that the time is so limited, but I have too much things to express to all of you. You know that I want to conclude with my speech by quoting the very famous Indian literary giant. His name is Tagore. And Tagore once said that the furthest distance in the world is not between life and death, but when I stand in front of you, yet you don't know that I love you.
Thank you so much.
So the problem geographically between our two countries, China and India, is not the distance, but the way of how to express love and how to make that positive voice extensively and also effectively heard. So it's now for our two media, from Chinese side and also Indian side, to express our love to each other. So let's say it and mean it. And I want to conclude with the very Indian language that is Mujhe Donsi Branhe.
Very nice.
That means I love you.
We're here
Indian
for friendship.
language. Thank
We're
you
here
very
for friendship.
much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. I'll go to Smita Prakash for her opening remarks. It was on earlier. Now it's fine.
My gratitude to Ministry of External Affairs, External Publicity Division, Public Diplomacy for having me over this evening, and welcome to our Chinese friends. After that very interesting talk that you gave, I'm afraid mine is not going to match with that effusiveness that your speech had. I'm hoping, Sue, that after going to Bangalore and to Goa, Delhi doesn't ruin your experience, because
It doesn't. The people are so friendly there. Yeah.
Yeah, in Goa and Bangalore, but in Delhi, I'd ask you to watch out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm also kind of want to point out that we are the third panel today, and after the two panels, the last panel is about finding solutions, like a roadmap ahead, and it's the only panel which has women. So I guess when solutions are needed, you need women on a panel.
And in majority.
Right?
And in majority.
In majority. So the roadmap is always given by women, I'm hoping, forward. Roadmap for media cooperation, I would say that if anyone is to make a roadmap, first is to see what are the hurdles that come our way. And the hurdles, I think there's a general consensus that what happened in 2017 is something that we should watch out, that kind of reporting, what happened in Doklam and thereafter, is not mirrored later. And I think everybody has learned their lessons. If it means that the standoff in 2017 was the media's fault, let me just put up my armor immediately and take the side of the media to say it was not really the media's fault. What happened was on the ground. What happened was a diplomatic breakdown. What happened was a strategic breakdown. What happened was a military breakdown. And all that the media did was report it. Was the reporting accurate? Was the reporting without color? There I accept, yes, it wasn't. It was colored tremendously. It was extremely vicious, and it was extremely propagandist in nature, something that shouldn't be done. And I take responsibility for my country's reporting, and I point towards the Chinese media too. I think in both countries, somewhere, the kind of cautious fact-based reporting which used to be done with regard to India, China, that got destabilized in some manner. It also goes to show that Indian media is not like what the Chinese media is. We are a very noisy, free of course. We have freedoms way beyond what most democracies have. You'd think that the Western democracies have a lot of freedom. I want to dispel that fact to say that in our country we have a very free media. There are times where the governments do try and control us, but they are able to control only a section of the media, and even in that section, a microcosm of that section. And there is such a pushback from the media that, our media becomes more volatile, more aggressive as soon as there is any kind of restraint which is put on our media. And that comes forth even when it comes to reporting on foreign relations and what happened with India, China in 2017. Whether the media, I spoke about this reflection of foreign policy in the muscular foreign policy, as Sue mentioned, about Western media talking about Indian foreign policy being muscular, and that is a misconception. In India, we don't see the Western media with the amount of suspicion that probably Chinese media does. We are open to the West or the East or the Middle East, or anybody's impressions about India. We don't see everything with suspicion and mistrust with regard to India. The Indian media I'm talking about. Indian government is a totally different point of view. I'm talking about Indian media. Indian media does not mirror exactly what the government of India says, does, believes in. We have our own methodology. So when facts are given to us by governments, whether it is foreign governments, whether it is the Indian governments, I'm afraid we don't trust, Sue, as you said, trust being one of the T's. Indian media does not trust openly. Indian media verifies, re-verifies, and after that only do we trust. So when something is told to us with regard to even India-China relations, whether it is told to us by the Chinese government, whether it is told to us by the Indian government, we verify on the ground. Yes, we do report that this is what the Chinese government said, this is what the Indian government said, but we verify that. We verify that on the ground as much as possible. With regard to reporting on India and China, as you're well aware, it's extremely difficult because our line of actual control is militarized in both sections, right? It's not easy to access that area. It's not easy for Indian media to report from China, as you were well aware, and vice versa. Whereas in India, it's easy to travel and report from India, which even the Pakistani media is able to report from India easily, whereas the Indian media is not able to, though we officially do not have any reporter from India in Pakistan or Pakistani media in India. This is because of various reasons. When it comes to reporting on China, for decades there was some kind of a self-imposed moratorium where we did not report colored point of view. It was fact-based. Maximum what you saw was some op-ed columns by retired foreign office officials or some think tankers who would write some op-ed columns, and that was it. And everybody based their reporting based on those few columns. That's not the case anymore. Now it's a more aggressive, more open, youngsters writing about China, because there is more people-to-people contact, so more Indians going to China, more Indians reporting on what's happening in China. There's a lot that we can do as far as the road ahead is concerned, and the only way is sharing more information, sharing more people-to-people information, not necessarily government-to-government communication. And that means being more open to contentious issues also. To keep that away from the table would be a mistake. So Indian media will report on Taiwan, will report on Tibet, will report on Arunachal, Dalai Lama, trade wars, BRI, CPEC included, Masood Azhar as terrorist, India in NSG. These will be reported, and China will have to face the fact that Indian media will not cow down, whether it be reporting aggressively or whether it be reporting openly. So Indian government and the Chinese government both need to accept that sharing information, taking us into confidence, will help in building trust rather than clamping down on information, because we are going to get information somehow or the other. That's our job as journalists in India. So while it's not a complaint with regard to both governments, it is a suggestion. One non-controversial way of moving forward, I'm going to wrap up, would be to go forward in media cooperation as far as technology is concerned. India is home to over 150 news television broadcasters and 100 more digital startups. You would have met with a couple of them in the earlier sessions. Now, a lot of these, they depend on real-time video for content. And a little known fact is that India is using mobile 3G data for live transmissions, and that comes from a Chinese company which started way back in 2009 and 2010. That was called Dayang Corporation 3G Live Solutions. These were the pioneers. China was the pioneer which started in small backpacks, which cameramen carried on the back. And we at ANI were the first to use this. We tapped on this technology, which was there from China. It came to us through another company, but we tapped this, and sure enough, within a matter of months, there were other channels and today, all content that goes to all television channels across the country, over 100 television channels, which goes across, which depend solely on this, came from China. Indian startups can use this in a large way, the technology which you people are producing. Another example is TikTok, which was developed in Beijing. And 2 years, that has amassed over 1 billion users, something that Indian startups are learning and tapping. Now, that you're using lip syncing, you're using music, you're using cookery shows, but there's also negative content which is going through TikTok. And as a result of that, there are countries which are clamping down, say Indonesia. Now, what you can learn from our startups, tech-based startups, is that most of these startups which are using these contents, they have old school journalists who are sitting there and watching the news content which is going and making sure that stuff like porn and wrong content, depends on what you think of as wrong and what happens in India is wrong. Of course, that judgment is based on you, but you can learn from how our startup companies, news portals, and web portals are using old school journalists to run these, and how they are able to clean content and put on our web portals, something that you can learn from our guys and we can learn from your guys. I'm going to wrap up with this so that we have more discussion-based talk after this. Thank you.
All right, as we head into discussion, we still have 2 more guests. So Shu, would you go ahead with your opening remarks?
Thank you, Abhishek. On this panel, we have 3 female panelists. We are searching for hope ahead, and I have a daughter, so obviously I'm confident in the future. As long as we unleash the potential of female sisters. They are talking about geographical issues. It's the toughest issue, basically, between the 2 countries. Let me share with you something happened between me and Indian journalists back in Beijing. We were invited to a panel to talk about the situation in Sri Lanka. I think in November, when there's a crisis of who is the prime minister of that country, and of course, besides the politics in that country, the host would very much instigate the two of us to fight each other, to point a finger at each other, because there's a somehow belief, especially from Western media, there's invisible hands, visible hands from China and from India backing different politicians. China, former President Rajapaksa, and India, the ousted Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. But unfortunately, no. And we didn't point finger at each other. We both actually said that we should probably pay more attention to the views of Sri Lanka. Basically, it's about Sri Lanka. It's about this country. Because the president and the prime minister, they don't really see each other, see eye to eye with each other. The president is more from the rural area, is a Buddhist, while the prime minister is a Christian. In a Buddhist country, belongs to the small minority, and he's not really in touch with the country, let's say. So the president basically swears, I will never work with the prime minister again. Seems the situation now resolved. But anyway, it's a failed show, but I found friendship in my Indian colleague over there, and we continued our talk after the show, actually. And we, indulge us into the wild imagination of Asia, China, India, and with so large population, of course, like 40% of GDP. Asian countries, they represent 40% of the global GDP, 4 billion people. Asia, India was colonized by Britain. China was semi-colonized by Western countries, 8 powers we call them. It's just the 21st century. Isn't this time for, to leave Asian affairs to Asian countries? Isn't it proper for China, India, plus Russia, Japan, big players, to play some role, to play a major role, to have a larger say in deciding the issues like peace, stability, prosperity, development among Asian countries? But if you look at the reality, it's not like that. It's still not decided, but to a large extent affected, the peace and prosperity by Western countries. For example, you have 50,000 troops, U.S. troops in Japan, 28,000 troops in South Korea, 5 military bases in the Philippines, and you have the UK with territories in the Indian Ocean. And you have, of course, France, still with the possession of territories in the Pacific Islands, things like that. It just shows like it's Asia. This is Asian countries, but you have a strong hand from the West. This is our wild imagination. We are talking about not China century, but Asian century, probably led by India and China. If the two countries unleash their huge potential, I would say there's a strong possibility. But of course, many people would point to the negative side of the two countries, as my colleague pointed out. You have Doklam bot issue, you have NSG issue, you have the application for the UN Security Council, Pakistan, Kashmir, BRI, all those issues. But then, as Shakespeare said, there's nothing either good or bad. It's about, how you think about that. If you look at I would say, India-China relationship is like a coin which has 2 sides. If you look at the positive side, it's actually very encouraging. In particular, since April, the Wuhan summit, many people mentioned that. We have a borderline which is I think it's like more than 30,000 miles long. But if you look at the past 40 years, there are fewer incidents than the line between China and North Korea. No single shot has been fired between the two countries. I would say that's very impressive. That's something. And if you look at the past, more than half a year, the two leaders, Prime Minister Modi, Chinese President Xi Jinping, they met 4 times. Such a frequency of the high-level meetings is rare between two countries. And of course, if you look at on the personal notes, you know, there are larger picture. Let's say there's a story. You know, Chinese friend of mine is a Chinese diplomat. He said that in the international arena, on topics, many variety of topics, if a Chinese diplomat and the Indian diplomat somehow they switch the script for the speech, it doesn't affect the. It has no effects because basically it's a similar message. It's the same message: climate change, WTO, free trade, liberalization. You know, it's the same viewpoints because we are in the same situation. And speaking for the similarity, you know, many people mentioned about the Indian movies, which are widely popular in China. I'm not a film critic, but I want to comment on, you know, some of the movies like Dango. I brought my daughter, 12-year-old, especially to the movie theater to watch the movie because I want to show my daughter, you know, no pain, no gains. You know, you have to work hard in order to be successful. This is a message from India, but this is a message Chinese parents feel identify with immediately. Our values are similar, sometimes the same actually. Education, family, love, friendship, it's the same. And the Padman, the latest movie in China from India, you know, there's a message at the end of the movie that is like, if you make a lot of money, but if you don't bring about social changes, social progress, what's the point of having a lot of money? I think that it strikes the chord with the Chinese people because we also think so. But if you look at Western countries, it's based on individualism mostly. You are encouraged to make money, bigger money, more money. That's all for yourself, for your own success, but nothing beyond that, too little beyond that. So I think you see these similarities, you are so hugely encouraged. We can do something. We can bring the two countries, the two peoples together, and because we are basically the same. And of course, on a personal notes, like I have 2 Indian friends, one from Beijing, one from Australia actually, when I was there doing research, and he's an engineer sent by an Indian company to stay in Australia for like 3 months, 4 months. And he invited us, prepared a meal for us, Indian food actually. That's my first time to try authentic Indian food. There are Indian restaurants, but I'm not sure they are authentic in Beijing. It's very tasty actually. I was scared at the beginning, but I tried it. I like it. During this visit, I tried to find the similar food, but no. But still, I was exposed to a large variety of Indian ingredients and the different cuisine and the food. And mostly, I think I can take that. I enjoy. So if you look at, I have actually a female friend who is Chinese, who is the strongest defender of India in China. Anything, if you speak in front of her, anything negative about India, then she would fight back because she basically fly back and forth between Qingdao, coastal city, and India. And she has Indian friends. I mean, understanding, if you know more about this country and these people, you would fall in love with them. The same is with China, I think. So cutting the story short, the route map ahead, I would say, is really about bring people together, talk to each other, and even work together. And look at the big picture and stay positive. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shu. Now let's go to Supriya for her opening remarks before we get into the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the Ministry of External Affairs for giving us this opportunity. Very important discussions and really a great learning for me. To start with, I would like to talk about a little bit about the Indian broadcasting industry that we have in India, because if you have an information or a knowledge about how huge and extensive it is, then it helps you to understand as to how we actually need to work out a strategy for better understanding of, between the people of two countries. So if you look at the Indian broadcasting industry and the number of TV households that we have in India, it's actually humongous. It's about 183 million TV households that we have in India. And about 50%, that is about 99 million TV households, are on cable TV. They get their content through cable. And about 70 million is through the DTH, which is direct to home. And one of the most important things that I wanted to highlight was that about 30 million TV homes are on Doordarshan's platform, which is India's national broadcaster, the public service broadcaster. Now, how does it help in this kind of a discussion? I'll come to this a little later. But I'd also like to tell you that if you look at the private TV broadcasting industry, in order to cover the diversity of the country that we have, the number of languages, the culture, we have at this point of time 873 licensed private TV channels in India. And most of them, I would say about 500 and odd channels, are free to air. They are not paid. Another important thing is that if you say about 870 TV channels, half of them are news channels and half of them are GEC channels. So there is a lot of news that India generates, which is day in and day out. And I'm not counting the number of local channels, because generally you will find that in a particular district or a province, you have a number of local news channels which are in the local dialect. And that again generates a lot of news which is at the local level, and that's day in and day out. We have a huge, in order to distribute the entire, the number of channels, etc., we have more than 60,000 cable operators who take these channels to, the every nook and corner of the country. Talking about the radio, if you look at the private radio channels, we have more than 300, it's approximately 328 private radio stations in the country. Again, a lot of information that is being provided over here. So now coming to the national broadcaster, I'm representing Doordarshan, Prasar Bharati. When it comes to Doordarshan, we have 23 channels, satellite channels, and more than 200 radio stations broadcasting from various parts of India. We have a large number of community radio stations, approximately 200. Now, why I mentioned all these numbers in front of you is just for you to understand the kind of information that India is generating and the amount of news that is being generated. So it's very important to understand this context, and only when you understand this, you will know that any information, as everybody mentioned on this panel and on the panels before, any information that is being generated, I think it needs to be channeled in such a way that it is authentic, it is correct. Because in this kind of a situation where you have a large number of organizations working on information, how correctly information is generated is extremely important. And that would help the countries, both the countries, to work on a strategy. And you cannot work on a strategy unless you know the kind of network that you need to work with. Now, having talked about the Indian broadcast scenario, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the roadmap. And, it was touched upon by Smita, and I totally agree with her that it is for women, actually, to give the roadmap, as she rightly mentioned. But it is extremely important and crucial that the roadmap is agreed upon. It is clearly defined. Only then it will work. I do not know how many people know about this, but Doordarshan has a memorandum of understanding with the CCTV. And we signed it in 2015. It is still valid. And it is really beautifully worked out. It has got very good provisions for working together. The roadmap is quite clear. It is quite well laid out. It's just that we need to really in a very dynamic fashion, we need to operationalize it. So what does it actually talk about? If you look at the areas of cooperation, then between India and China, everybody has actually touched a little bit about, the people-to-people contact, and extensively also, some speakers have spoken about the need to connect with the communities a little bit more between the countries rather than government. I totally agree with that view. And I think the best way to go forward would be to work in the area of co-production between the two countries, whether it is the national broadcaster or the private channels. We need to work together and produce more and more authentic, genuine content between the two countries, whether it is food, it is culture, it is, the languages, it is about the mythology between the two countries, whatever it is. I think there has to be a lot of genuine production. That, I think, is something which is not happening. This is what I feel at this point of time, because why do we actually, talk about the co-production? Why should we be co-producing? Because it will foster better understanding of people and culture between the two countries. And seeing is believing. So if India produces something on China, China produces something on India, and we work together to produce something which is shared on a shared cultural heritage, I think that is something which will instill a lot of confidence, and it will foster better understanding. Another important thing about co-production is that it helps to share our resources. It will definitely be very useful. And I would like to recommend that we set up a kind of a co-production fund together, which both the countries can dig into. We can nominate a co-producing team, and I'm willing to offer on behalf of Doordarshan Prasar Bharati, because we already have a MOU. If we could set up identify teams for production, which is for films or for even a television series or even for short films, I think it will be quite interesting to understand and learn from each other. Of course, we need to work on the regulatory framework, which both the countries have. But since there is already a memorandum of understanding, I think the road is quite clear. And lastly, I would like to mention two more areas, or maybe three. One is that we have very rich content already produced between both the countries. So why can't we create a common heritage, a common pool of content, which could be shared? Smita would agree with me, if there is a common content platform already created, it is very easy for us to kind of dig into that common platform content. And I would like to recommend this because from my experience, I would like to talk about it. I'm the Vice President of the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union, and we have a very, very important platform which is called as Asia Vision, which is a news exchange platform. So what do you do? Is that the Asia Vision platform, it shares more than 18,000 news stories from various countries at a single platform. So you dig into the news platform, and that's all authentic, produced by countries. Can we not set up a news exchange platform between China and India on the similar lines, which is online, which is available every time? And if anybody wants to dig into it, that is authenticated people, they can dig into that and get access to the information immediately, which is online, which is, timely information. I think it will kind of break the barriers of communication and create a new way of sharing the, information. So I'd like to mention that. And lastly, though it appears to be a very, a small initiative, but it is very significant, which is the exchange of, the people, the creative people between the two countries. So while everybody would talk about the exchange of students, journalists, officers, that's fine. But I think unless we have an exchange and the visits by the creative people, artists, I would like to mention that, I don't think you will be able to kind of reach, the kind of understanding that you want to create. So I would like to recommend, whether it's the music or it is culture, dance, whatever, I think a more vigorous exchange of cultural exchange needs to take place. And on behalf of Doordarshan, I would like to offer our platform, our services, to work more closely with Chinese media to promote this kind of a cultural exchange, because I feel that would definitely foster better understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Supriya. Thank you. I've been given an indication that we might be running out of time. Are there any questions, or should I go ahead? Okay, here is a question, please. Or is it a suggestion?
A little bit observation.
All right.
I'm the chief correspondent of Shanghai Wenhui Daily. I've been staying here for 3 years. So I'd like to say something about response to Ma'am Sumita Prakash. Ma'am, you mentioned about the professionalism of journalism. I really admire that. I learned a lot about the professionalism of journalism from Indian journalists. Thank you for this. But just now you said that, we have to verify on all kinds of issues like NSG and UN 1267, Masood Azhar, and China, South Tibet, and all kinds of things. But what I want to say is that for us media persons, we should keep the big picture. For example, at Doklam, if we keep talking about China is militarizing, and India is militarizing the border. So our mainly, where our news is facing the readers, the citizens, they will be hostile to the other country. And when they become hostile, it will be difficult for the government to deal with the other one. So that we have to, do something. We should create a very, good public opinion for the government to handle the crisis. So I think the Doklam crisis is something both China and India journalists and the media should draw lesson from. And luckily, I think that we are, progressing. We're doing better on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Smita, would you like to respond briefly to it, or should I go to my conclusions?
Just a brief line. I get what you're saying. It's an editorial call that every news organization in India takes. There is social responsibility as well as reporting on facts on the ground. If there is a military build-up, then that is a fact on the ground. Whether that complicates matters for the government or not, that is something that the government has to think about it, because that is something that the press will report.
Right. And I had mentioned in my opening remarks that a certain kind of restraint in certain situations is demanded, and that should be done. Okay, now since I sat through all the 3 sessions, please give me the liberty to conclude for all the sessions. I have made 10 bullet points. I'll go through them. If there is any disagreement, maybe we can discuss it later.
Abhishek, can I just point out?
Sure.
The gentleman pointed out about Dangal. I think what, you pointed out about Dangal, and you wanted your daughters to see the film, to see how there's no pain, there's no gain without pain. You have your tiger moms in your country. Our moms here are tiger moms too. So,
Yes.
when we read about how Chinese mothers make their children really study hard, and education being a passport to success, that's something that Indian mothers say, this is what China
And associate
does.
with. Yes.
Yes.
The second point you said about, you said that there's something beyond money. Indians are now watching that film Crazy Rich Asians and saying, that's where we want to be. Let's first
We just had one wedding of that kind.
Yeah, let's get first rich, and then let's think beyond rich.
Absolutely. So on that note, I'll come to the conclusions and read to them fast. Number 1, the governments have taken the people-to-people issue seriously, finally, as was mentioned by External Affairs Minister Ms. Sushma Swaraj, that earlier they would discuss this issue for maybe 10 minutes in their meetings, but today they've spent a good day between our forum and the ministers themselves. So it's on the footing that it should be, the people-to-people contacts issue. Now, language barrier was something which was discussed by many participants. When in ancient times people could communicate, Buddhism could travel to China, and every doctrine could be communicated, we should be doing it more easily. So for example, do we have apps that translate Chinese Mandarin into English easily? And if they are already available, do we publicize them a little more? On the Indian side, there is a regional media diversity that needs to be understood and explored. So can we have these formats travel to state capitals also? That's one of the possible roadmaps. Then both sides reported, as in journalists on both the sides reported, difficulties in carrying out their journalistic assignments. So can we have more cooperative establishments? Like, can we have more long-term visas for the respective sides? Now, more than a couple of Chinese guests spoke of not trusting Western media, something which Smita also mentioned. But from the Indian side, the view was that we really care a damn about the Western media. You know, we form our own opinions. And in a very raucous democracy, we do a lot of triangulation before coming to a conclusion. Point number 6, the issue of mistrust was mentioned by Yang Fuqing on the Chinese side and Shishir on the Indian side, and by Su on our panel. For this, can we have a more direct communication? Can we have shows where we have Chinese guests? For example, next time we want to discuss the CPEC or the BRI, can we have guests from Beijing live? Chinese guests, not Indian journalists reporting from Beijing, but Chinese guests coming live? Or for that matter, why just BRI or CPEC, even Doklam and Masood Azhar and whatever issues that are there? Can the media directly communicate with each other rather than the governments alone? One good point for the Indian side to learn, it was mentioned that lots of Chinese media hire Indian talent. I know for a fact that many of my friends are working from Beijing and Shanghai. Can Indian media also do the same and get Chinese talent into Indian newsrooms, both in national capital, in Mumbai and other places? Point number 8, I've seen more yoga classes in Chinese towns than Tai Chi classes in India. Similarly, on the other side, while a lot of Chinese food is available on the Indian side, it's difficult still to get Indian food on the Chinese side. Would you agree? So those issues maybe should be looked into. I don't know how it can be done because the governments should perhaps open up a little more so that more people travel and hence this would happen. Shu made the point on not a single bullet having been fired between the Indian and the Chinese side since 1962, or 1967, I believe. Right. Su also mentioned how President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have met 4 times this year. In fact, I believe more than 17 times since last 4.5 years. So that actually gives a measure of the seriousness with which both the sides take each other's relationship. The top leadership of respective nations have met as many as 17 times in the last 4.5 years, including summits and bilaterals and polar sites. So this shows the intent is there to keep the partnership, the defining partnership of the century. And this brings me to the conclusion of this very fabulous forum, discussion of ideas, exchange of opinion we have had over the last couple of hours. If we have more to discuss, we can do that outside while having tea. Thank you so much.